amendment. Come on up. All right. All right. Ms. Randall, you're recognized for 5 minutes to talk about your amendment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and Ranking Member McGovern, committee members, for the opportunity to testify today on the funding package. Across the country, from the streets of Minneapolis to high school students in Aberdeen to the neighborhood vigils happening across my district, the American people have been unequivocally clear. No more funding for ICE. No more funding for Kristi Noem, for Stephen Miller, for Tom Homan, for Greg Bovino. No more abuses of tribal sovereignty. No more violating the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. No more illegal warrantless searches, pulling people from their cars, using their children to lure them outside. We've had enough. Renee Good and Alex Preddy's murders were deliberate, intentional acts of violence perpetrated by the Trump administration. And the wake-up call for this Republican majority should have come sooner. There have been more than 30 deaths of individuals in ICE custody under this fascist regime. ICE agents are tear gassing families in their cars, individuals simply exercising their First Amendment rights. There's blood on the hands of every individual aiding and abetting the Trump administration's dangerous fear-mongering invasions of US cities. I refuse to stand by while our neighbors are shot in the streets, while children are kidnapped from their parents, and while tribal citizens are held hostage. I'm here today to call for Secretary Noem's immediate resignation, and if not, her impeachment. But she's not the only one who should be out of a job at DHS. Customs and Border Patrol's Greg Bovino, the architect of the chaos that's been unleashed on the streets of Minneapolis, is directly responsible for this administration's cruel assault on constitutional protections. He should be out of a job, and even President Trump knows it. Shortly after Nurse Preddy's murder, Bovino was demoted and kicked out of Minnesota, but that's not nearly enough. Just like no one wanted pedophile priests shuffled from one parish to another, it's unacceptable to move a bad agent from one state to the next. That's why I'm offering an amendment to demote his salary to $1. Taxpayer dollars should not be given to individuals who think they're above the law, who are driven by bigotry, and who are murdering Americans. And the list of laws they are violating is much longer than I have time to go into in my limited time here. But of particular concern to me is the way that these rogue agents have been violating the sovereignty of tribal nations. I'm hearing from tribal members in my district, as well as those in Minnesota and across the country, that ICE is illegally detaining and targeting Native people for their skin color. This is abhorrent. And that's why I'm bringing forward an amendment that would condition federal funding for ICE on upholding tribal sovereignty. My amendment would prevent ICE from entering an Indian reservation, tribal trust land, or restricted fee land without first notifying the tribe with jurisdiction over the land of their presence. That notification must include an acknowledgement by ICE that they have reviewed what the Indian tribe's tribal identification card looks like and reaffirms that members carrying those cards are in fact American citizens. We must continue to reinforce protections for tribal lands. We must continue to fight back against ICE's violation of the Fourth Amendment, and we must ensure that their so-called immigration enforcement operations don't hinder public safety. That's why I'm also offering my bill, the Emergency Responder Protection Act, as an amendment to this funding package. What happened last summer, CBP agents holding up crews fighting the Bear Gulch fire in my district for hours to interrogate and ask for IDs before ultimately detaining 2 first responders, should never be allowed to happen again. I've met with local officials from across the country who are scared this will happen in their communities next, which is why I introduced the Emergency Responder Protection Act and will keep fighting for it to become law. And this brings me to my final point about why there is no other option than to remove Secretary Noem from office. She is so obsessed with dressing up in tactical gear and posing for photo shoots with weapons that she has completely forgotten the important emergency response functions at DHS. I know some of my colleagues are wary of voting no on this package because it would also withhold funding for other DSH agencies like FEMA, but let's be real. Those other agencies are also suffering with Kristi Noem at the helm. Under her leadership, she's been dangerously undermining the safety and resiliency of our communities dealing with disaster. FEMA has frozen critical funds like the BRIC grant program, held up billions in disaster relief, and treated disaster response as political gamesmanship by punishing states and arbitrary withholding funds. The communities in my district who are experiencing more and more frequent flooding desperately need those funds. That's why I also have an amendment to condition this funding package on releasing all of the frozen FEMA BRIC grant funding, because Secretary Noem is dangerous. She's dangerous for the American citizens, she's dangerous for immigrant communities, she's dangerous to local governments who are simply trying to protect lives, property, and infrastructure in the face of a worsening climate crisis. I urge this committee to include my amendments in the funding package. And finally, I want to note my support for Representative Summer Lee's amendment to the Clinton contempt resolution to hold Attorney General Pam Bondi in contempt. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. Ms. Fishbach?
I have no questions.
No questions. Mr. McGovern?
No, I support your amendments. I thank you for coming here. But as you have probably learned by now, on appropriations bills in particular, this majority has not been particularly open to allowing there to be debate and votes on the House floor, which is, again, why what is happening now is far from regular order. But I appreciate you being here, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott has no questions. Ms. Scanlon? No questions. Now we're coming to me.